Welcome to Newport, Kentucky, a small, humble town just across the river from Cincinnati. Today, it might seem like just another quaint town with a few attractions. But would you believe me if I told you this was once the original Sin City? It all began in the early 1900s. During the Prohibition era, Newport, Kentucky became a hub for illicit activities. Newport's strategic location and existing infrastructure made it a prime spot for bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. Prohibition may have banned alcohol nationwide, but it only fueled the demand for underground establishments offering booze, gambling, and other illicit pleasures.
Yes, Newport, Kentucky was basically like Vegas before Vegas was ever made. So all of the gambling was actually located here because at the time, Cincinnati's law enforcement basically didn't want any sort of vice type of activities in Cincinnati. So you couldn't set it up there. So people would set it up across the river in Newport. So it was kind of a thing where it was outside of the reach of a Cincinnati's a law enforcement, but it was still kind of there, and everyone from Cincinnati would go over there for that and then come back.
Newport was perfectly placed to profit, a river town with the easy access to Cincinnati and far enough from prying federal eyes. But this wasn't just chaos, this was business. Organized crime moved in, and two powerful groups emerged to control the city's underground economy. The African American Crime Syndicate, led by Percy Williams, and the White Crime Syndicate, represented by Frank Screw Andrews. Frank Andrews, born Frank Joseph Andriola in Cincinnati's Walnut Hills neighborhood, was an enforcer for the Cleveland Syndicate and had ties to the New York Mafia.
He was a colorful character. He was the leader of the white mob in Newport, which means that he handled the syndicate that was going on and running the casinos and the gambling and the prostitution. He was the head mobster, if you will. But I think it showed that Screw Andrews was a guy not to be messed with, that he knew what he was doing and he ran a business and he did what he felt he needed to do to make things successful.
In short, Frank Screw Andrews operated in Newport to establish and maintain the New York Mafia's and Cleveland Syndicate's control over the city's profitable illegal enterprises, leveraging its strategic location and existing vice culture. Frank became the heavy hand of the Cleveland Crime Syndicate that controlled illegal activities in Newport. He was known for strong-arming local businesses and ensuring everyone knew who controlled the clubs. To maintain their operations, he kept law enforcement in his pocket.
I think you couldn't run a successful mob business without some help from the local establishment, the police and the judges and things.
But Frank got greedy, setting his sights on expanding his empire, even if it meant challenging rival factions. Sharing the same streets as many of Frank's businesses was Melvin Clark, an African-American gangster from Ohio.
Melvin Clark, from what I'm able to find out, he got his start in crime in Columbus, Ohio, when he was just a teenager, really. He at first started collecting number slips and bringing them in. Then eventually he rose up the ranks and he started running his own lottery system. And he expanded out throughout Ohio, and then eventually he was underneath another black mobster named Percy Williams, who at that time was the a black kingpin of numbers in Ohio. So Melvin Clark was put under him. Then eventually he rises up and kind of eclipses Percy Williams.
In 1952, however, Percy Williams died unexpectedly in a car crash. His protege, Melvin Clark, inherited his operations. Stepping into the role of Newport's new African-American numbers king, Clark controlled several establishments, including the Alibi Club at 310 Central Avenue, which he co-owned with Oliver Bull Payne, another prominent African-American numbers figure. Cracks began to form within Clark's ranks. Oliver Payne, once loyal to the African-American Syndicate, defected to work for Frank Andrews, managing the Alibi Club under Andrews' control. This betrayal enraged Melvin Clark, setting the stage for a violent confrontation.
They both had their own territories. They both were both groups were made up of very determined and probably not very nice people. Yeah, I think that there was a constant push back and forth between the two syndicates. everybody trying to get into somebody else's territories. And it would eventually lead to conflict, and of course, some conflict led to violence and murder.
The betrayal set off a chain of events that would turn deadly. Tensions reached their peak when Clark confronted Payne at the Alibi Club. After a heated argument, Clark shot and killed Payne. But Melvin paid the price. He was banished from Newport, leaving Frank to seize control of the Alibi Club. When Clark returned, he found not only that his club was gone, but that many of his former allies had switched sides to work for Andrews. The final blow came from another betrayal. William Davis, a former associate and Melvin's right-hand man, now worked for Frank. Furious, Melvin tried to kill Davis. He failed. With hostilities reaching a boiling point, Frank Andrews reached out to Melvin Clark proposing a truce. The two agreed to meet behind the Alibi Club to discuss their differences. But what happened next depends on who you believe.
Andrews comes out, says he wants to let bygones be bygones. They're standing in behind one of the casinos. He puts out his hand to shake his hand. Mr. Clark pulls out a revolver, fires twice, misses Andrews. Andrews returns fire, firing 3 shots, killing Marvin on the spot. And of course, claiming self-defense, and so on. The strange thing is, though, if you look at the autopsy report, Mr. Clark was shot 3 times, twice in the chest and 1 underneath the chin. Some of the reports talk about how when he approached Clark, he reached out, grabbed Clark's hand to shake his hand, and then quickly pulled a revolver and shot him underneath the chin.
The most puzzling detail was Melvin's fatal gunshot wound, a bullet under his chin. Coroners suggested this angle would have been nearly impossible unless Frank was an extraordinarily skilled marksman, or the events didn't unfold as he claimed. Despite these inconsistencies, only white police officers testified in Frank's favor.
But if you look at the court case, the only people that were allowed to testify as to what happened were police officers. And each one of those police officers, if I recall right, was paid $100 each for their testimony.
Each paid $100 for their statements. Their testimonies upheld Frank's claim of self-defense, and he walked free. Speculation about what really happened remains. But karma has its way. As the years passed, Newport's era as Cincinnati waned. With businesses and syndicates moving to Nevada, what we now know as Las Vegas, Frank's powers diminished. In his old age, he suffered from dementia. He was eventually admitted to St. Luke's Hospital, now St. Elizabeth in Fort Thomas.
Frank Andrews is over at St. Luke's Hospital. He's on the 4th floor. While he's there recovering from surgery, 2 guys show up in trench coats and dark hats, supposedly, tell the nice nurses that they need to take a coffee break. Well, they go in to see, Mr. Andrews. Nurses come back from their coffee break. They go check on Mr. Andrews. They find he's not there. He's laying on the ground outside the window of his hospital room, and it's ruled a suicide. But how a gentleman would throw himself out the window, because I understand they didn't open the window, he went through it.
When the nurses returned, they found Frank critically injured 2 stories below his room, having fallen through a shattered window. His death was ruled a suicide, but many believe otherwise. And with Frank's death, the Sin City of era Newport came to a close. So next time you walk the historic streets of Newport, or the halls of an old hospital, remember, you might just be walking in the same footsteps as these figures of the past, or even on the very ground where their blood was spilled.